Hey guys, my name is Brian, and I'm here to introduce you guys to programming, specifically in the Java language. So let's get started. What is programming? Programming is the action of writing instructions for a computer to complete a certain task. For example, right now you're watching this video on YouTube. A programmer somewhere at Google decided to write a program that tells the computer, show the YouTube logo on the top left of the screen, allow us to search for videos in the center text box, and show the video to the user once one is clicked on. That is a program that was specifically coded by a developer to complete the task of watching videos. So, why do we program computers? We program computers because they're really good at doing repetitive tasks and math operations. For example, if I ask you, what is 2,220 divided by 2? You might be able to do it in your head after a few seconds, but a computer can do it in a few milliseconds. So, in this day and age, what programming languages are popular? As of 2018, 3 come to mind: C++, Java, and Python. You might be wondering, why these 3 specific programming languages? Well, these 3 languages are general purpose programming languages, which means that they are easily used to program for the most general use cases. These 3 languages have a wide base of developers and a huge amount of resources to learn them online. This makes them easy to pick up and popular to use. So now, we're going to go ahead and get into the technical part of the tutorial, which will be your first program. So before we do that, we have to install 2 things. The Java SDK. SDK stands for Software Development Kit. It's what allows your computer to understand and interpret the code that you write. So I'll leave both of these links in the description so you guys can install these programs. IntelliJ IDEA is what we would call an IDE. IDE stands for Integrated Development Environment, which is basically just a fancy word for somewhere you can write your code, test it, and run it. So go ahead and pause the video, install the programs, and I'll be right here. So now that you've installed the SDK and the IDE, we're going to go ahead and launch IntelliJ IDEA. Once you launch it for the first time, it'll show you a screen somewhat similar to this. It'll say create new project, import project, open, or check out from version control. Since this will be our first project in the series, we're going to go ahead and create new project. It'll give you this list of project types in the left bar. And since we're going to be working with Java, we're just going to click Java. And we're going to click 1.8 for our project SDK. And then we're going to go ahead and click next. Keep clicking next and until you get to this page where it says project name. You can name it whatever you'd like, but I'm going to name it tutorial. Once you're done naming your project, go ahead and click finish. Here you'll see the main screen of the IDE. On the left bar, you'll see your project hierarchy. This will show you all the files and everything associated with the project that you're currently working on. So you can see the name of your project up here. It says tutorial, so we're going to go ahead and expand this folder. You see a file folder that says .idea. You don't have to worry about that right now. But more importantly, you see something that says SRC. When you're coding, SRC means the source folder. This is where you're going to put your code in for the first time. So we're going to click on the SRC folder, right click on your mouse, and it'll bring up a menu. Go ahead and hover over New, and click on Java Class. Now right now, classes are a little bit above the scope for our first video, so don't worry exactly about what that means when you're creating a class. Now we're gonna get a prompt that says create new class. You can name it whatever you'd like, but I'll call it default. So now that we're in default, you'll see these keywords: public class default, an open curly brace, and a closing curly brace. What I want you to do is go ahead between the open curly brace and the closing curly brace and just click enter a few times to give us some space to write our code. The first thing I want to introduce you guys to is the primitive types in Java. Primitive types are the basic types of data that Java can use to build higher order data. Now that may not make sense right now, but after a few examples it'll become clear. The very first data type that I'm going to show you is the integer, or int for short. To tell the computer that you're going to create an integer for it to store, you say the keyword int, int. So now the computer knows that the type of variable that you're about to create is an integer. Now, since we're creating a variable that we're going to store a value in, we have to name it. So, what would you like to name it? I'm going to name it age. You can go ahead and follow along by naming age as well. So what did we do so far? We told the computer, I'm going to create a variable that's going to be of type integer, int. I'm going to name it age. And now we need to assign something to it. To assign a variable, we use the equal sign. So I said to the computer, I'm creating an integer variable named age. I'm going to assign to it, well, what are we assigning to it? Well, my current age is 21, so I'll put 21. And this is the most important thing that I can teach you in the very first video. Every time you're done creating a statement in Java, you put a semicolon at the end. This basically tells the computer, okay, this line of code is done. So what did we do here? We told the computer, I'm going to give you an integer and I want to name it age. In this variable, I want you to store the number 21. And then I said, okay, that's all I want you to do. We're done with this line. So now whenever the computer sees the word age in our code, it'll refer to the number 21. That's our first primitive type, the integer. So I can make as many integers as I want. I can name it age2. And let's say I'll be 22 next year. So now age2 will be 22. And if I wanted to, I can make another integer named, let's say, day. And today is the 4th, so I'm going to put the number 4. So that's how you basically create a primitive integer, name it, and assign to it a value. So I want to introduce you guys to the next primitive type. The next one I want to introduce you guys is called the float. So we need to tell the computer what type of variable we're about to declare. To do this, we use the keyword for float, which is float. Now we want to name it something. Well, I'm going to store the value of pi, so I'll put pi. Well, we know that pi is equal to 3.14. So at the end we have to put f because it's a float. I'll get more into that once I introduce to you guys the next primitive type. But for now, just know that when you're declaring a float, you always have to put the letter f at the end of the number. So as you can tell, floats can store decimal numbers, so numbers that are not integers that have a decimal point and numbers after the decimal point. And that's basically what they're used for. Going forward to the next primitive type, which I previously mentioned, was the double. So we're going to call the variable for the double pi2. This will also be 3.14, but I don't have to put the f at the end. Why do I not need to put the f after a double variable? Well, the reason is that floats and doubles, they represent the same type of data. They represent numbers that have decimals and numbers after the decimal point. Well, then you might ask, what's the difference between a float and a double? Well, this is a little technical for the first video, but to give you guys an answer, a float is less precise than a double. It's about half the memory that a double takes. So for example, if I had a really long number after the decimal, if I had 3.14777777 going off all the way to the end of the page, I might not be able to fit it into a float variable because the float can only store so many numbers after the decimal. We call it a double because it's double the size of a float, and we can represent more numbers with a double. So there we go. So now I want to introduce you guys to the next primitive type. It's called the character. In Java, when we want to declare a character, we use the keyword char or car, whichever one you want to pronounce it as. So we're going to name our character the letter A. So our variable name A is equal to open quotation marks, and we're going to put A. As you can tell, a character variable can store letters. It can also store numbers as well. Any single letter or digit, it can be represented as a character. So moving forward to the next type of primitive, which isn't really a primitive, it's an object, but since it's so useful to Java, they made it really easy to declare. It's called the string. So we tell the computer that we're going to declare a string by typing the word string, and we can name it name. And we're going to assign it to Brian. As you can tell, I opened up a double quotation mark and then I put my name Brian and I closed it with an ending quotation. So, what kind of data can we represent with a string? A string holds letters, numbers, sentences, anything that you'd like to write down in a sentence in real life, you can represent it as a string. So, as you can tell, the character and the string are related. A character is just one letter or one number, and a string is a collection of all of these numbers or letters together. So for example, if I wanted to, I can break down the string into a series of characters. I can break it down to the character B, I can break it down to the character R, I, A, N, and their equivalent. But in Java, we have a specific object called the string, which will hold them all together between the double quotation marks. So after we've gone over string, I'd like to introduce you guys to the next primitive type, which is Boolean. We declare a Boolean by writing out Boolean, the name of the variable, and then the value of the Boolean. The values of Boolean can only be true or false. So in this case, I need my variable is in school. Well, currently I am in school, so I put true as the value of this variable. When I graduate, we can represent it as false. So Booleans are really good for representing true and false situations. Going forward, we have the last three primitive types. I'm going to talk about them all together because they all have a related topic, which is the size of memory. So a long, as you can tell, is just a number with the L at the end, which represents that this is going to be a huge number. All three of these last data types, the long, the byte, and the short, are related to the integer type, where they can store integers, but the amount of memory that they can use in the computer is different. A long has double the amount of memory that an integer has, which means that it can represent huge numbers that the integer can't. The byte and the short types are similar to the integer as well because they can represent integer numbers, but in memory they have less reserved for each type. So a short is bigger than a byte, but an integer is bigger than both of them. What this means is that I can represent more numbers with an integer than I can represent with a short. And I can represent more numbers with a short than I can represent with a byte. That might sound confusing, and for the scope of the first video, it's a little bit too technical, but if you're still interested, I'll leave a link in the description so you guys can see how memory is represented for these types in the computer. So those were your primitive types in Java. I hope it gave you a little bit of an insight into how Java works, how to declare a variable, and what different types of variables you can have in Java. So the next video in the series will cover arrays and methods. That video should be up within the coming weeks, so go ahead and subscribe if you're interested in learning a little bit more in Java. Thanks for watching, and have a nice day.